You know, when I thought about doing this video in this short series where I explore some new zones in Turtle WoW which caught my eye, this was the video I was unsure about. When it comes to World of Warcraft, there are always the races in-game which tend to draw the short end of the stick. By that I mean, there are some races which are in the spotlight, and there are races which are just there. For the Alliance, this has always been the Gnomes, and for the Horde, this has been the Goblins. This was the case until the recent release of the Undermine patch in retail, where the Goblins get to share some of the spotlight. But in most of the game and lore, they've mostly been background characters, with only a few being, only a few handful of characters being notable. However, I was a fan of particular Goblin dungeons such as the Motherlode and the Grimrail Depot. Regardless, this lack of popularity is also reflected in the community of WoW too. According to character creation data from Icy Veins, Goblins only make up 1.8% of characters being made, placing it at 21 out of 28 different race faction combinations. Gnomes make up 2.2%. And I'll give you one guess for the most played race in WoW, and no, it is not humans. Once again, I'm reminded that this is a YouTube channel, so please like and subscribe. Looking beyond gameplay, I've wondered what appeals, or in the Goblins' case, the lack of appeal, makes a player choose that race. They're not as pretty as the elves, their lore not as complicated and well known like the orcs and humans, and their starting zone pales in comparison to the rich and engaging questline of the Worgen starting zone, which was released in the same expansion as the Goblins in retail. This isn't to say the Goblins lack any lore. They play a role, especially in vanilla WoW, with all of the cartels that run the free ports of Azeroth, plus Gazlo, one of the most well-known goblins in World of Warcraft, built Orgrimmar. It was so good he built it twice. Compared to many of the other races in WoW, I feel like the Goblins are less concrete in their lore, but what they do have is a strong character identity. One which is characterized and driven by the lucrative profits of capitalism. Hey, no one invited the Ferengi here. I'm cutting all of the red tape in the pursuit of commercial progress, either through manic engineering, or, being mercenaries for, hire, or simply exploitation through slave labor. They're a race which can fit into many situations if you mold them well. With what they lack, it makes up for inflexibility, in which fan projects like Turtle WoW can leverage strongly, while still remaining within the rough guidelines of the Warcraft universe and established lore. In Turtle WoW, also known as World of Warcraft Mysteries of Azeroth, Goblins are one of the two new races that you can play as soon as you boot up the game. Much like the High Elf race, the Goblins have their own starting zone, reputation faction, and faction capital. Whilst the capital of Sparkwater Port isn't as grand as Alathalas, it retains the Goblin spirit, as it mirrors many of the other free ports across Azeroth, like Ratchet and Booty Bay. In-game, you have the choice of being a hunter, mage, rogue, warlock, and warrior, whilst being far more limited than what was available for Goblins in Cataclysm. At this stage of the WoW timeline, this selection makes more sense. Goblins have an obsession with over-the-top engineering, so a hunter would make sense for a goblin obsessed with big guns. Rogues are saboteurs and deal with poisons and assassinations. Mages are tricksters. Warlocks literally make a deal with the devil. And warriors are your big standard bruiser. While this is simple, personally I think the class fantasy is important. Besides, something about goblin shamans and priests just didn't really sit quite right with me. But now that I think about it, a goblin priest does kind of make sense.
Ah, and look at what we have here! A bloody heathen!
One thing that I have to commend in the character creation screen is the amount of customization you have. It's really quite impressive what the Turtle WoW team has done with the vanilla model and their commitment to using this model over the Cataclysm counterparts, and it's something that I'm genuinely quite pleased with. The vanilla goblin in all its polygon blocky glory. I was surprised with the hair types and the facial hair on offer, and I might as well say this now as I'm not sure when I'll be able to mention it. The Turtle WoW team have also provided new recorded voice lines for playable goblins. Once again, they could have just taken them from Cataclysm, but I respect the additional effort here. You can find some of the videos online of people auditioning to be the voice of the goblin, and they're worth checking out if you have the time. There's so much great talent here. In this playthrough, we'll be playing a warrior. I found this quite a breeze, as I can imagine the starting zone can be a bit of a challenge as a mage or a rogue. However, as a warrior, we're a bit tougher to kill. And for our appearance, we're now Goblin Freddie Mercury. So, you may be wondering what this game is. Well, it looks like World of Warcraft, but it isn't. This is Turtle WoW, a fan-made version of the game separate from Blizzard's game. If you'd like to know more about this game, I've made a short of it for brevity's sake. Please go and check it out in the top right corner. Before we take a look at the new starting zone, let's talk about the goblins and where they fit in the Warcraft universe. If you've ever taken a look at the fantasy genre, you'll know that the concept of the goblin is very common. Of course, appearing in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and in stories of the Forgotten Realms, goblins have mainly served as some kind of antagonist or, comic relief. Goblins usually come with the connotations of mischief, craftiness, trickery, and in real-life folklore, they're all sorts of evil and mischievous sprites. The concept of the goblin has been used in many different scenarios, such as in Warhammer, which portrays something akin to the Tolkien version of goblins, and, it's been used as a real-world analogy of offensive stereotypes. And, now we have this growing trend of things that we describe as goblin core, an aesthetic centered on the natural world, particularly appreciating aspects often considered ugly. This revision of the notion of what the goblin is quite interesting, as it really emphasizes the flexibility that you can do with a goblin or an idea of a goblin. This flexibility has also been shown in the Warcraft universe with how they've handled the goblins. Side note here, completely for my own self-gratification, I wondered why goblins are green. Looking into it, it seems like the earliest interpretation was a greenish-grey sort of colour from the early illustrations of Lord of the Rings, and then the Warhammer painting studio ended up painting their goblins green. As Warcraft originally stems from Warhammer, the green association came along with it. Anyway, I digress. Ever since the introduction of the goblins as a playable unit in Warcraft 2, how they've been portrayed in the Warcraft universe has developed and has changed over the last few decades. From the RTS days to the Warcraft RPG to vanilla WoW and their current incarnation in retail WoW. For the longest time, the goblins have remained a neutral faction with a complicated history with the Alliance and the Horde. On both factions, you can find goblins working for either side, but historically, the goblins have always shown favour and closer ties to the Horde, and with one group of goblins joining the Horde officially in the Cataclysm expansion. This also happens in Turtle WoW too, but differently. The first appearance of the goblins, of course, in Warcraft 2 as Horde units included sappers, zeppelins, and a giant turtle, apparently. This sets them up to have this crafty engineering vibe to them. They're the brains whilst the orcs are the brawn. In Warcraft 3, however, whilst some goblins continue to work for the Horde, such as Gazlo, The Goblins represent a neutral faction of mercenaries that can be hired. This neutrality had continued into Vanilla WoW and beyond. In the wider Warcraft lore, the Goblins have mostly been there since the Titans first arrived on Azeroth. To keep the summary short, this species was originally located near Ulduar and were experimented on by the Titan Keeper Mimiron. Mimiron? Whatever. With an element called Kajamite. When consuming this ore, it greatly increased the intelligence of its user, and over time, this proto-race would eventually become the Goblins. When the mega-continent of Kalimdor was shattered during the Sundering, which has left us with the world which we have today, Goblins, in their escape from the Sundering world, found refuge on the island of Kazan in the South Seas. The island of Kazan would be a blessing and a curse for the Goblins, for it was not long until they were occupied by the Zandalari Empire, an empire ruled by trolls. During this occupation, the Goblins were forced to work in the Kajamite mines. However, unluckily for the Zandalari, this exposure to the ore reawakened the Goblins' dormant intelligence, and through a rebellion and advanced technology, they would eventually liberate themselves from the Empire. Following the liberation, the Goblins would quickly turn on themselves, with many splitting into separate factions called cartels, each headed by a trade prince. Whilst the truce between the cartels would be brokered under a united trade coalition, the battle for the economic arena had just begun, as the Goblins would be renowned for their inventions, although they would be unreliable, and their shrewd mercantilism. In-game, you can find some of the more notable cartels, those including the Steamweedle Cartel, the Bilgewater Cartel. This would be the group that would eventually join the Horde in Cataclysm, and the Blackwater Cartel. In Vanilla WoW, these used to be called the Blackwater Raiders, and they were more tied to the Steamweedle Cartel. You can mostly find them in Booty Bay. There are only two instances where groups of goblins haven't conformed to this convention. The Black Fuse Company, which were the goblin antagonists from the Warlords of Draenor expansion, or more famously, the Venture Company. Since Vanilla WoW, the Venture Company has served as the main goblin antagonists. Much like the ontologically evil oil barons of our real world, the Venture Company are notorious for plundering Azeroth's resources in the name of profit. The company specializes in gathering raw materials. If you can dig it up, chop it down, or blow it out of a mountain, they will. They also got some of the best heavy machines, miners, shredders, and drills out there. The Venture Company has had and continues to operate throughout many parts of Azeroth. In addition to being known for their ruthless methods, the company has historically had dealings with nefarious organizations like the Defias Brotherhood, the Sun Fury, and the Crown Chemical Company. Some of the more notable locations you can find the Venture Company include Stranglethorn Vale, Mulgore, the Barrens, the Stone Talon Mountains, and several areas across Northrend in later expansions. Use and abuse is the company's attitude, not only abusing workers and using indentured servants, they're not shy to backstab or assassinate to get what they want, or even just use sheer brute force. Whilst we're not entirely sure why they're called a company, I speculate this is to do with legal loopholes when it comes to responsibility. Whilst the cartel is run by an individual or a family, in the eyes of the law, like US law, a company is a separate entity, meaning that it has its own legal identity distinct from its owners and shareholders and those who run it like directors. Thus, the company can easily wipe away any sort of accountability for their actions. But less about the horrors of our real world.
Liquid! Ooh, liquid! Oh, liquid!
In a unassuming camp in the rocky Stone Talon Mountains, a mutiny is brewing, which will split the Venture Company in two, for better or for worse. Headed by the goblin Nert Blastentom, The Durotar Labour Union are a group of goblins that joined the Horde after defecting from the Venture Company. They're an eager lot, almost too eager in proving themselves to be a valuable asset to the Horde. The Durotar Labour Union was the first original faction added to Turtle WoW, and much like most factions in-game, you can gain reputation with them. Originally, Goblin players would start in the Venture Company camp in the Stone Talon Mountains, where you and foreman Blackstone Tom would go on to lead a ragged Venture Company crew to found the Durotar Labour Union. In all essence, they are deserters. Due to awful working conditions such as faulty equipment, night elf environmentalists, and cursed ruins in their mission, they said enough is enough. When the Venture Company returned to see how Nert and his team was getting on, it was time for them to skedaddle. Whilst on paper, the Union appears to be quite different from the company, outside of Kazan, the Venture Company dominates much of Goblin life aside from the cartels. With the promise of fortune, the company strips many goblins into servitude, but after many years of greed and wasted opportunities, the Labour Union hopes to cut up the Venture Company in the pursuit of profit. They're very much the same, despite the original ulterior motives. All goblinhood comes back to greed.
Today's subject, slavery.
Seeking to capitalize on their new relationship with the Horde, and the Horde seems to specialize in colonizing hostile wastelands across Azeroth, the Goblins of the Labour Union has unsurprisingly set themselves up in Durotar. Sparkwater Port, whilst being no Thalas, is a better hub for the Goblins compared to the High Elves before they got their new starting zone, when they were confined to Little Silvermoon in Stormwind. I could criticize it slightly by saying that it's a bit much having 3 race capitals all being in one zone, those being Orgrimmar, Sparkwater Port and Sen'jin Village, as well as Durotar being the starting zone for 2 Horde races, as well as the Goblin starting zone leading here too. But it doesn't actually feel that bad. In honesty, it actually makes Durotar feel more lively. Sparkwater Port is a multicultural hub of commerce with goblins, orcs and ogres living and operating out of the town. It has some interesting quirks such as the pits, an offshore oil facility, and the mining operations in the area. The area is its own questing hub, ideal for those looking to get more questing content out of Durotar. However, when you finally arrive here as a goblin, you're not here for long, as you're sent across Kalimdor to other zones. But as today we're focusing on the Goblin starting zone, I won't be covering too much of this town, so I encourage you to check it out for yourselves. My only question is that I suppose that in theory, there is no restriction on what race can join the Durotar Labour Union. The Venture Company hasn't been shy of quote-unquote employing other races in the past, so I don't see why the Union should be race exclusive. I see you, Turtle WoW devs. You think you can sneak a Princess Bride reference past me? I think not. Prepare to die. Are you ready to make some gold? We'll take a trip to Blackstone Island. Well, it was prosperous until recently, as, it seems like the Durotar Labour Union has come across some unexpected issues. Introduced in patch 1.17.1, Blackstone Island was introduced to serve as the new starting zone for Goblin players. I'm aware that from reading past forum posts that this place has been developed over time, as when it was first initially launched there were a few oversights, but these have been fixed since then. Blackstone Island is located to the east of Durotar, off the coast of Kalimdor, once a verdant and lush land full of trees and wildlife. The Durotar Labour Union's efforts to turn a profit from this area and to keep the Horde supplied with a steady source of resources has stripped it bare. and turned it into a ashen wasteland. Surprisingly, you can actually swim here if you have enough time to waste. Otherwise, there's a convenient flight point you can take. After escaping from the lands of Stonetown and Mountains, the goblins of the Durotar Labour Union have succumbed to their biggest natural weakness, greed. They have seized control of an island of rich and natural resources, but this new union has been built off the backs of hopeful goblins who sought to escape from the clutches of the Venture Co. These new recruits found themselves trapped in a similar predicament again, only this time under new management. Here you start your adventure, knee-deep shoveling for coal in the black ash coal pits, like the worthless cretin you are. I found that when I first started this zone, I was dumped with an incredibly large amount of tedious tasks which filled up my quest log. This isn't ideal for new players which might get overwhelmed when starting a character. Sadly, I also did most of the beginning quests and some of the quests later out of sequence, meaning that on occasion I would discover a new NPC to collect quests from, only then to receive a quest from someone else to speak to the person I just did all of the quests for. In my experience, compared to other starting zones, it's a lot less guided than others, and there are not as many questing hubs, meaning that when you do arrive, you have a full log for the quests to churn through all at once. As said previously, this can be a bit overwhelming, but for players who run around with groups questing together, this methodology of questing progression would be a blast. Your first quest is to, unsurprisingly, collect coal. You're a bottom of the barrel worker, and to claw your way out of the pit of brimstone you're in is to do monotonous tasks with no real rhyme or reason except that the job you've been given. Which is good lore-wise, but not particularly too enticing for new players. Aside from this, I spent most of my time killing what remained of the wildlife on this wasteland of an island, as well as take action against some rampant robots that have gone haywire. In your early adventure, you can see this huge shredder, which is an awesome way to foreshadow a quest you'll do later. It also represents the extremes the goblins have taken to strip mine this island of all of its natural resources. However, much like most goblin shenanigans, this abomination to nature has somehow crashed and is stuck in a side of a hill. It's all very thematic. If you haven't noticed already, the goblin operation here isn't going as smoothly as planned, and this chaos will reveal itself over time as the reality of the situation and the troubles the goblins are in here becomes apparent, as even the coal pit supplies are running short. In a quest that I did out of sequence, I came across two goblins watching their own shipwrecks by the shore. From this goblin, we need to collect a logbook, which seems to have a few numbers changed here and there, and a few log entries forged. If this fell into the wrong hands, well, someone will be taking a stay in the pits of Sparkwater Port. Whilst we're also there, we need to go and kill some more wildlife pieces and rescue some bits and pieces which were found in the wreckage. It's not long until your task with reporting to your class trainer in Rustgate Ridge. This town is the main questing hub for Blackstone Island, and it has everything you would expect. Quests, more quests, trainers, a mailbox, an inn. Seriously though, there are so many quests I think I maxed out my quest log. Ultimately, there are two NPCs that have any real importance in this area, which is Taxlo Rustgate and Maxlo Rustgate. Taxlo is the leader of Rustgate, thus the name, and as the big man, he's atop of his very own tower, and you soon learn that he has no time for specifics. He sees issues and he wants results now. Meanwhile, sulking around the corner, you have Maxlow, his brother. Taxlow gets him to do all of his dirty work, which he then passes on to us. However, reporting to Supervisor Ozic, there are two problems that we need to investigate: Black Ash Mine and the Rustgate Lumber Yard. Working operations in this area have come to a halt, and the island's gnolls are working in cahoots with the venture company to disrupt the Union. You can find ogres working with the venture company who usually act to the brutal to the venture company's cunning. Clearing out the mines is quite simple. By now, the questing on the island is quite formulaic. It's either kill, collect, or kill and then pick up an item off of a corpse. But that's vanilla WoW questing for you. Although one or more offending quests are the ones where you have to kill robots that have gone haywire. Some you have to kill, some you need to collect items off of, but they're similar looking robots with the names changed slightly. Once you have cleared the mines and the lumber yard for Supervisor Ozic, you get to report to the big man, Taxlow. And after a few quests, he reveals to us that some of the boys don't really like the working conditions the Durotar Labour Union put them through. So they've defected to the venture company. It's like poetry, it rhymes. Once we collect enough badges, we receive a quest to kill the defector ringleaders, but we'll get to that area later. To emphasize how fragmented and how non-linear questing in this zone is, you can straight up just leave the island. You can get a quest to go to Sparkwater Port and inform Grand Taskmaster Nert Blastentom, and yeah, he's not too pleased about it. The island's a complete disaster. If Blackstone Island isn't sorted out quickly, not only does the Union risk a monetary loss, but also risks the relationship with the Horde. At this point, you don't have to return to Blackstone Island to support Taxlow, and instead make your own way to Orgrimmar. From his brother Maxlow, you can go two different routes. To the Waterhole at the north end of the island and report to Pumpmaster Galdax, or you can head over to Gazik's workshop to the southeast and collect a late shipment of parts. Both areas have problems, either slacking workers or ambushes from the denizens of the island. Regardless, it's your problem to solve. For my playthrough, I went to the workshop first. This is where you can also leave the island via one of the choppers. But here there isn't much: a workshop, a house or two, and a landing platform. Here there is only two quests that really caught my interest. From one of the workers on top of the flight deck, you receive the quest to go and explore the giant shredder robot that we mentioned earlier. From another goblin standing by a cliff nearby, we get to hear a brilliant new scheme, which turns out to be an allegory for cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. Whilst the premise is quite funny, as the goblin is looking to get rich quick, and believes that the shells, or in this case shell coin, will have some intrinsic value. It's all tongue-in-cheek, poking fun at the crypto bros and grifters. Although whilst the requirements for this quest is easy, it can be quite tedious at times. Despite your efforts, the shells may not always drop, but you can also pick them up from shells on the floor as well, on the beach that you explore. I suppose the tedious of it all is kind of like mining Bitcoin itself per se. Whilst running along the beach collecting shells, I stumbled across various elven ruins. It's small elements like these which reaffirm the fact that the devs really do have an eye for detail. Due to the proximity of where Blackstone Island is, as well as it's quite relatively close to Ajara. Also, this island would have been near the Well of Eternity before the Sundering. These may be some forgotten ruins that belonged in and around Zin Ashari based on its location, or this is merely a reminder of a time gone by. These ancient ruins have been around for thousands of years alongside the trees and cliffs of its island. Now little beauty remains in this island as it's been stripped for profit. Whilst we do encounter Murlocs on the island, it would have been nice to see some Naga too to go alongside these ruins. Upon return and handing over the shells, old Frapsnap thinks she's going to be rich, and we receive counterfeit shell coin in return, which of course sells for nothing. Did somebody say irony? I believe shell coin used to be a wider joke in the Turtle WoW community. However, I must admit that I know very little about it. If you have any stories about them, please leave them in the comments. The other notable quest here is over at the flight port from Fanzo Edgeline, specifically to do with the huge machine we saw near the coal pits. The Super Gutter 1500. This machine could harvest faster than any other shredder could, and is probably the major reason why this island is a wasteland. Apparently it's been stuck in the mud for a short while now, and no one knows why. We're sent to investigate and recover the remote so Fanzo can see if there are any malfunctions. When we arrive, we're immediately jumped by some venture company goons. It seems we now know what has happened. Either the shredder was hijacked or the crew became turncoats. The latter seems more likely, as when we return, Fanzo is surprised why our co-workers had turned on us. After collecting a few other kill, collect and carry quests here, we might as well head north to the waterhole and speak with Pump Master Galvax. When we arrive, our suspicions are confirmed. The shipment of water is missing due to sabotage. Up on the side of the cliff nearby sits the venture company slums. The slums is a tough place to level, as you'll be constantly harassed by Venture Co loyalists as well as those who have defected from the Union. Here you will also find the leaders leading the venture company in this area, surrounded by bodyguards. If you're going to go here, you're going to need a team, some sort of unalive squad, because Taxlo wants their heads. One mob that we can find all over the north and east side of the island are the Gnolls, as well as in the Black Ash mines. Before the venture company conspiracy was discovered, it was presumed that the Gnolls were the ones behind the sabotage. Aside from the Murlocs, the Gnolls seem to be the only sentient species native to this island, and now only occupy a small portion of it, driven out by the industrialism and the steel toe-capped boots of the Bruiser squads. Oh yeah, that reminds me, in driving home the theme of the zone, we're constantly reminded that you are dirt. From your peers and your employers, you are one step away from being fired, put into servitude, or being beaten by goblin bruisers. Anyways, the other quest here, which is more mentionable, is the head-on assault with the Gnolls. By the time you get to this part of the island, it really feels like the natural storyline is coming to a close as we begin the last final push against our enemies, those being the Gnoll and Venture Company alliance. Picking up 2 quests from Bruiser Yevo, with tasks with slaughtering the remainder of the Mudpool Gnolls. First by collecting armband trophies from their corpses, in which Yevo will be using as toilet paper later. And secondly by cutting off the head of, or should I say the paw, of their leader, Grab Mudhide. He can be found in a cave around the corner near the waterhole. Once again, this part can be quite tricky, so I suggest bringing some friends. Yevo rewards us by saying that he'll let the bruisers know not to hit us so hard from now on. With the heads of the venture company leaders collected from the Goblin slums, and the Mudpaw tribe leaderless, we make our way back to Rustgate Ridge. Taxlo rewards us and sends us on our way. Perhaps he'll sleep a little lighter now, knowing that supplies from the workshop and waterhole are back up and running, and the threats from the outside have been quelled for now. But this won't last. From what we've seen here, this society is unsustainable. Once again, this island will fall into chaos, and it's not a matter of if, it's when. Throughout our journey, I like to commend the great custom music which has accompanied us throughout. One of the more overlooked things that the Turtle WoW devs do is the extra work that we put into the immersion and the ambiance of the game. As mentioned prior, the fan-made custom voice lines are great. However, one of my favourite soundtracks here has to be from Rusgate Ridge, especially the part with the ticking clock. It reminds me of the Goblin mantra, "Time is money, friend." Every second you waste is another second you could be earning gold. So, this has been a little different from my last two videos, as technically there haven't been many secrets in this new zone or much references. One of the good things about this race is that it feels very sandboxy, flexible. Put them in any scenario and it just works. Although, one of the things that I like to do in this series is to question why the Turtle WoW devs have done this, and the reasons why. To be honest, the Goblins are a tricky race to get right, and from a new player perspective, Blackstone Island is a more challenging experience to get into, but it has the right thematic vibes which work well with the Goblins of vanilla WoW. In Kata and Retail WoW, the Goblins changed quite a bit, and this can be especially felt in the Goblin starting zone in Cataclysm. In the Cataclysm starting zone, it's full of gimmicks and hijinks. Despite the overall story being weaker compared to others, there was a different Goblin feel. For instance, you were already at the top, well, at least upper middle class, one might say. You were living the high life in your manor with your pool and servants. It was like Jersey Shore mixed with Grand Theft Auto. Of course, in this zone, you started on Kazan, and it's an island known for its wealth, but until you leave Kazan, you're living a life of luxury and hedonism. In Turtle WoW, you live at the very lowest dregs of society, where your reward might be one less beating or a notable sentence on a resume. Life sucks when you're not at the top. You're in a society that sells you an Americana-like dream of you work hard and hustle only to find yourself in the coal pits falling for the next shell coin scam. It's exploitation through and through. At least to me, this feels like a authentic Goblin experience lore-wise based on our other Pride's experiences in vanilla. And I think whilst the Goblins lack rich lore and history, nor an engaging storyline, here the immersion shines through. But it's not for everyone. You will be in a miserable grey wasteland, killing mobs for people that despise you and have very little meaning, just to save some bigwigs from losing their job. Here in Blackstone Island, you may solve problems, but you're hardly appreciated. It's a bit sad, isn't it? Thank you to my members for supporting me in this video. It's been a little longer than usual, but I've just been busy. What else can I say?